There is a switch inside your brain. Scientists found it, and almost nobody is talking about it. Not a metaphor, not a motivational concept. An actual documented neurological mechanism that separates people who execute relentlessly from people who stall, delay, and wonder why willpower never seems to work for them. And the most disturbing part? Most of what you've been told about discipline is not only wrong, it's been working directly against this switch the entire time. So stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to show you rewrites everything. Let's start with the lie you've been living inside. You've been taught that discipline is about force. Grit your teeth, set the alarm, push through the resistance, white-knuckle your way past the feeling, and eventually the habit forms. And when it doesn't work, when you fall off the routine, miss the deadline, abandon the plan, you tell yourself the same story. You just don't have enough discipline. Other people have it. You don't. But here's what neuroscience actually says. Willpower is not a character trait. It is a finite neurological resource governed by a region of your prefrontal cortex called the dorsolateral PFC. And every single act of self-control you perform, every time you resist, suppress, override force, drains that resource measurably. Researchers at Florida State University demonstrated this in a now famous series of experiments. Participants who exerted self-control on an initial task performed significantly worse on a subsequent unrelated self-control task. They called it ego depletion. The tank empties, and once it's empty, the willpower model completely collapses. This is why your discipline works perfectly on Monday morning, and by Thursday afternoon you're back to the exact behavior you swore you'd changed. You weren't weak. You were running a system that was never designed to sustain itself. So if willpower is the wrong engine, what's the right one? This is where the neuro switch enters. Deep in the midbrain sits a structure called the ventral tegmental area. Its job is dopamine production, but not the dopamine you've heard about, not the reward hit after the thing you want. This is anticipatory dopamine. Dopamine released before the action in response to a predicted reward. And here is the mechanism that changes everything. When your brain predicts that an action will produce something meaningful, not pleasurable, not easy, but meaningful, it fires dopamine proactively. It doesn't wait for the outcome. It funds the behavior in advance. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz spent decades mapping this at Cambridge, and what he found was essentially this. The brain doesn't follow through because it's disciplined. It follows through because it has already decided the action is worth the metabolic cost. That decision, worth it or not, happens entirely below the level of conscious thought. It happens in the prediction circuits, and the criteria those circuits use to make that call has almost nothing to do with how important the goal is, how many times you've told yourself you should do it, or how good your intentions are. The criteria is identity. Here's the part that will sit with you. Dr. Roy Baumeister and Dr. Mark Marvin at Case Western published research showing that self-control failures are almost never about inability. They are about identity mismatch. When the behavior you're trying to sustain conflicts with how your brain has classified who you are, the nervous system generates friction, subtle, persistent, invisible friction that costs energy with every attempt. You feel it as resistance, as procrastination, as the inexplicable inability to just start. But it isn't resistance to the task. It's your own nervous system running interference on an identity it doesn't recognize. This is the neuro switch, not a hack, not a trick. A structural shift in how your brain classifies the action. When the behavior becomes congruent with identity, the friction disappears. Not reduces, disappears. The anticipatory dopamine fires automatically. The prefrontal cortex stops overriding and starts directing. Execution stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like an expression of who you already are. The people you look at and think, how are they so disciplined, so consistent, so effortless about this? They didn't develop supernatural willpower. Their identity and their behavior are aligned. The neuro switch is on. And now the question that actually matters, how do you flip it? This is where most psychology content stops being useful because it gives you tactical answers to a structural problem. But the research points to something precise. Identity is encoded through behavior, not belief. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You cannot affirm it, visualize it, or journal it into existence. The brain encodes identity through pattern recognition, repeated action that accumulates into a classification. James Clear popularized this in Atomic Habits as casting votes for your identity. But the neurological mechanism goes deeper than the metaphor. Every time you perform a behavior, your brain updates its model of who you are. Not dramatically, fractionally, but consistently. And after enough iterations, something shifts in the prediction circuit. The behavior stops requiring override. It starts requiring less and less deliberate effort. The neuro switch flips. This is why the size of the initial action doesn't matter nearly as much as the identity signal it sends. 2 minutes of the thing you've been avoiding does more neurological work than a 3-hour session you forced once and never repeated. One is evidence. The other is an event. But here's what nobody tells you about the transition period. Before the switch flips, you will feel like it isn't working. Behavioral neuroscientists call this the extinction burst, a temporary spike in resistance that occurs right before a pattern locks in. Think of it as the old identity fighting back before it loses classification status. This is the exact moment most people quit, not because the method failed, because they hit the friction and interpreted it as evidence of failure rather than evidence of progress. If you have started something 20 times and quit at the same point every time, you have probably been quitting inside the extinction burst. You were days away, maybe hours, and the story you told yourself, I'm just not someone who does this, got one more piece of false evidence deposited into it. There is also a second component to this method that most people miss entirely, and it lives in the social wiring of the brain. Humans are neurologically designed for identity. Research from the University of Groningen found that social environments are one of the strongest predictors of whether behavioral change persists past the 90-day mark. Your brain is constantly taking cues from the people around you about who you are and what your kind of person does. If your environment is not aligned with the identity you're trying to encode, you are fighting neurology with willpower, which we already established doesn't work long-term. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone in your life. It means deliberately increasing exposure to environments, communities, and inputs where the behavior you want is normal. When the brain observes your identity reflected in the people around you, the switch flips faster. The friction drops sooner. The prediction circuits update at an accelerated rate. If you only take one thing from this, discipline is not a trait you either have or don't. It is a neurological state you either have access to or you don't yet. And access is not determined by effort. It's determined by whether your identity and your behavior are pointing at the same target. The neuro switch doesn't require more willpower. It requires you to stop using willpower as the primary mechanism and start using identity as the foundation instead. Small, consistent actions. Environment alignment. Staying inside the process long enough to cross the extinction burst. That's the method. That's what actually works. And the version of you that executes effortlessly, the one you keep imagining and then giving up on, isn't a fantasy. It's a neurological configuration, one that is available to you. You just haven't been given the right map until now. If this unlocks something, subscribe.